I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing. It's an RB30, which is God's engine, but single cam for life.
Wasn't God's engine, isn't it RB26 because it's like Godzilla? Isn't that where God's engine came from?
I'm not sure that God and Zilla connected has anything to do with
well,
religion.
Hang on. What about SR20s though?
I think that's a piss take, isn't it?
I don't know. Where does God's motor come from then?
Here.
What about JZ?
From VL Commodores.
I thought JZs were way better.
Nah, it's just bloody modern trash. This is the original OG.
Well, RB30s.
RB30, bro. Welcome back to the RB factory. Today we're going to make a start and hopefully a finish on building the RB3025 to go into my Z32 300ZX project. We've had some machining and everything done on the engine, and basically the assembly of it and that sort of thing and the measuring and all that is pretty much the same as any other engine. We've done a few engine build videos. Today we've got a special guest in Dave from Rogan Industries. He's helping me out with the stuff that is important, which I don't know how to do. Things like measuring the crankshaft, measuring the bores. He's actually gone above and beyond and measured the weights of everything and measured the weights of each rod end, balanced all the rods. That's all been done, so it's all ready to go. We've got a book full of imperial measurements because Dave's old school and he doesn't do metric. And he's checked everything to make sure everything is being machined correctly, that the tolerances are right for oil clearance, piston to bore and that sort of thing. We've got a couple of more things to do before we can start assembling it, but before we do that, we kind of wanted to delve in a little bit deeper into what an RB3025 is, or an RB30 DET, or however you want to call it, and what is required to build one. The RB engine's, it's a pretty old engine. It was designed in the early 80s. We first saw them in Australia in the VL Commodore and the R31 Skyline Australian built version, and they were a hugely popular engine when they came out, on account that they were about 1,000 times better than what was the original Holden 6-cylinder engine that was fitted to the previous Commodore. So originally, or actually all RB30s are single overhead cam by nature, so there was never an RB30 DET, or as we're going to build. So it is a hybrid engine, and as such it does have some little intricacies that you've got to work with to make it all work. Fortunately, the internet worked that out a long time ago, back in the forum days, and my research to actually work out how to do this, I ended up just finding an old document, a Word document or a PDF that was built by a bunch of contributors of the Skylines Australia forum back in the early 2000s. So back when you could actually get useful information off the internet, not just an ad. So that still exists, and it was last updated in 2007. So obviously this is not new. This isn't new, but it is to us. So let's walk through it. So RB30 engine, you can just grab an old block and plonk an RB25 head on it, so to speak, or an RB26 head. You can't use an RB20 head, which is a pity because there's probably a lot of them around, because only Macca likes RB20s and everyone else just removes them and sells them. But there's some actual like structural differences between an RB20 DET block and this block, and you can't use them. So the choices of cylinder head to go with your RB30 block are RB25 Series 1, RB25 Neo, or RB26. RB26 is obviously going to be the best cylinder head to use because it has solid valve train rather than hydraulic. It's designed for high RPM, and it's a little bit less complex as far as it doesn't have variable cam timing like this head does, but it's also by far the most expensive, and it'd probably be 4 times the cost of an RB25 head just to get hold of it, and it wouldn't come with valve covers or timing belt covers, which are another couple of $1,000s in today's market. So it's probably not the most practical cylinder head to use for a budget build. If you're building a crazy engine, then 100% use an RB26 head, because you're going to save yourself a lot of time as far as not having to do a solid lifter conversion and that sort of thing. But for a street vehicle like we're building that isn't going to rev to the moon, this RB25 cylinder head is a pretty good choice. I bought this just off Marketplace from a guy who ended up helping me out with a lot of other stuff, and it's just had a basic service and valve springs put in it to suit the camshafts that we're using.
That's just a Series 1 head, yep?
Yep, so this is a Series 1 RB25. It is a VCT head, but it's not a Neo, so it's a bit simpler version. Neo head works fine as well, and there's also a pretty rare RB25 DE head that R32 Skylines had in them. Not many of those engines around, but you can also use that head. Anything that doesn't have VCT is a good thing, because it saves you from having to do a few modifications to the head, which I'll show you now. Because the RB30 block was never used with a cylinder head that had VCT, there's no oil passage that feeds the variable cam timing solenoid like there is on an RB25. So if we overlay this head gasket here, you can see what we're dealing with. That's a water gallery, and that is the variable cam timing oil feed. So there is no oil feed there for it, so you've either got to weld that up. If you're getting the head service, you can get a shop to weld it up, which I should have done, but I foolishly didn't actually read that document before I sent everything to the machine shop. But the other thing you can do is drill and tap it and just block it off. So I'm using 1/16 MPT, which I have a tap for, and that is a tapered bung. So that's just going to get screwed in there and basically Loctite it in there, or use a very high strength thing that also is going to seal oil pressure, and then the coolant gallery is just going to go over the top of it, but it's not going to have any fluid bypass. But to get the actual VCT to work, which we are, you then have to drill another hole in the front of the cylinder head to then supply oil to that. So we're blocking off this part of the oil gallery, drilling a new hole in here, and you can see that is actually the casting where the oil gallery goes up and ends up here. So we need to feed oil to it, and it's got to be from an alternative source. So we're going to screw that fitting in there, and then that's going to have an external line that will run down the block here into what was the oil pressure switch. So sometimes you can put a T-piece on there and run your oil pressure switch or whatever on it, but I'm going to be using an external oil cooler that will have ports for oil pressure that I can then put my sensor into. So that's probably your biggest stress, I suppose, when it comes to this. You don't need that if it's an RB26 head, because they don't have variable cam timing, but the other cylinder heads you will need that. The other modification that needs to be done to the block prior to putting the head on, you can see these pink circles I've put here. That's the oil feeds up into the cylinder head. The single overhead cam head has got a sort of hydraulic lifter set up on it as well, and they feed that hydraulic lifter and the camshaft and everything for lubrication. The problem with these, when you use a twin cam cylinder head and also upgrade your oil pump, which we'll get into afterwards, is you end up pumping too much oil into the head, and there's a pretty bad drainage issue with the twin cam cylinder heads. You end up with all the oil in the head and none of it in the sump, which is a good way to get engine failure. So what we do is you can buy little orifices, like basically one of them gets blocked off altogether and the other one is reduced size. So there's a multitude of sizes, and it depends on whether you have hydraulic lifters or solid lifters how much you restrict it down. So we've got the appropriate one to go in there and a block off for there. We're going to remember to put them in before we put the cylinder head on.
That's what the pink mark's for.
Exactly. And that's going to sort that out. We've got an external drain on the back of the cylinder head, which is highly recommended for any sort of built RB engine. These particular heads have a drain here that is added, but it's not very big, and there's nowhere on this particular block to drain that into. So using the dash 10 drain on the back of the head is the best idea. Probably one of the biggest Achilles heels of the RB is the oil system, and probably more specifically the oil pump. It's always a problem on high revving stuff, particularly people that bang into the rev limiter all the time, which is pretty much anyone that owns an RB, because you know that's what they do. So there's a bunch of upgrades that you can do to minimize / prevent that. In this case, what we've done is gone for an N1 oil pump, so an RB26. Basically, it's the best description is the best factory oil pump you can get for them. So it's brand new, genuine. They still have a cast and machined gear in them though. So the next thing that we do is replace that. So similar to what you do on a Barra, you replace your cast gears so they don't break. So that's a set of billet gears. The other problem with them is anything that's below like 1996 RB that isn't an RB26 has a very short drive tang on the oil pump. So you end up driving only half of that. So it usually it either rounds the end off or it rattles so much that it breaks the gears in half. So this is the fix for that. What you got to do is machine the end of the crank, like you machine off the drive that's on the crank that's been machined in there already, and then this gets heated up and pushed over it, and you end up with twice the area to actually drive the oil pump. So that's replicating a later model RB26 pump drive where that problem doesn't exist anymore. So we have got the crankshaft in the freezer at the moment because we're shrinking it, and then that's got to be heated because it's basically an interference fit, or a shrink fit they call it. So you heat this up so it expands a lot, freeze the crank so it contracts a lot, then interference fit them to each other. It's already been machined, ready to go, and Dave's also already linished the crank to give it a nice finish. So that's got the oiling system sorted. We got more oil going into the engine, we got better pressure, we got a better drive, we got a gear that doesn't break when you hit the rev limiter or just generally drive it. We're restricting the oil getting into the top end, and we're aiding draining it back out into the sump where it's meant to be. So that's, other than an oil cooler and general good practice filtration and that sort of thing, that's the best you can do other than going to a dry sump, which is way past what this car is for. I've already had the engine block machine that's been bored and honed and decked to suit the pistons that we're using. So that's all pretty much ready to go. We've got a bunch of stuff that's got to obviously go into the engine. So all the parts I'm using came from Golebys. We've got forged pistons, rods, a good set of forged rods. And we've also got some Kelford cams. These are drop-in cams, so you don't need to modify the cylinder head. So they're specifically built to just be able to, rather than being the biggest ones you can get, they just go into a stock cylinder head and still work with the variable cam timing, which Josh from Kelford tells me is very effective, so it's worth keeping. We've got an adjustable exhaust cam gear. You obviously got to use the factory Nissan gear for the inlet cam because it's the variable cam timing gear, but this is an adjustable gear for the exhaust, so we can set that up to spec. We've got gaskets and all that sort of stuff as usual, water pump. We've also got this little timing kit. If you watched the video of me pulling the engine, or the time lapse of me pulling the engine apart, you would have seen me trying to get this off, and they get stuck on there and there's nothing you can do other than destroying it to get it off. So this is probably going to be necessary. It's just an age thing. Got a timing belt to suit. It's got something like 11 extra teeth to go with the extra deck height. So the RB30 block's about 25mm higher than the RB25. And one last thing that I didn't actually mention to do with the 25-30 conversion is to do with the timing belt. So if you use an earlier block, that hole isn't there, and that is for this idler. So it is possible to get around that with some aftermarket stuff, but the block is actually cast differently, and that's on a very early RB30. Anything after sort of, I think maybe 87, that's going to be there. And the easiest way to tell whether it's there or not is because it'll have an oil drain and all the ports to feed a turbo. So that's pretty much what you're looking for when you buy a block. It's best to just get the right one and not have to deal with messing around with this stuff. But the other thing that you need to do is, that's an added. That doesn't exist on a single overhead cam because it doesn't need to be there. But when you've got dual cams, the angles of the belt change. And that is normally, that's your eccentric tensioner, and it normally sits there. It can sit there, but it generally makes the belt so close together that the teeth can actually clash with each other. So the fix for that is to re-drill this tensioner into the top of the block here, and there's some specific measurements for that that are in that document that I was talking about that we can chuck a link up to, and it tells you exactly how far from there and how far from there, and you just got to put some crosshairs across it, drill it. I made a little jig just so I could drill it straight and then tap it out. It's pretty straightforward. It's cast iron, it's very soft and easy to work with, but you may get your machine shop to do that if you don't have the facilities that we have. But that's got to be done as well. Pretty straightforward. Now all we got to do is get Dave over to measure everything up, do some ring gaps, and start putting it together.
You forgot the most important thing, Alan.
What, lemon squash?
Well, that, but you also forgot to tell everyone about the Black Friday sale that Golebys having.
Oh yeah, when's that?
That's happening right now.
Is it? Oh.
That sure is.
You can buy all that stuff for way less than I paid for it because Black Friday. I've no idea what Black Friday's for, but you can definitely get stuff cheap, so it sounds like a good idea to me. As with most things automotive, there's a lot of ways you could go about putting this engine together, as far as how much money you spend, what level of strength it's going to have, and it all comes down to the usage and what you want and how much you're willing to pay, I suppose. This engine is probably overkill for what I'm going to use the car for. It's not going to be a race car. You could actually just use a stock bottom end and refresh it, stock pistons, rods and everything, and just put the RB25 head on it. The engines are actually quite strong because they're old school and everything's big and chunky and heavy, as opposed to modern engines where they've lightened everything up to sort of increase the fuel economy and that sort of thing. And then we have to work around those light components just to get when we put power through them. But old stuff like this, it's pretty chunky and tough. So if you got no budget, but you got an RB30 block and there's always an RB30 25 cylinder head lying around because bottom ends are usually broken, you can do this at home with basic skills. What you can't do with basic skills is pretty much what we have done with this bottom end here. I had to get Dave Rogan in to do all the measurements and that sort of thing. It's critical if you've got aftermarket components that everything gets measured properly and adjusted. So we've spent probably 4 days going through all the clearances on everything. So to start with, you've got, I think we started with the crank, so the main tunnel clearance. Because we put studs in it, that can distort the main. So we had to actually bolt it all together, tighten it down to torque, and then check the roundness of the tunnel and everything. Fortunately, it was okay, so we didn't have to send it away to get machined. But next thing you've got to do is move on to your actual bearing clearances. Just so the oil clearance between the bearing and the crankshaft, those are critical clearances and they have to be right. It's worth noting that the factory clearances on these engines are so tight, it's like Dave couldn't believe how tight they were. And it checked out when we actually measured them as it came out of the engine. So it's a low performance engine. It's designed to last forever, so they kept those clearances really tight. So you do need to take that into consideration if you're just throwing together a stock bottom end. You can buy extra clearance bearings, which we did, and that's going to be your best bet. A wise man, Robbie Abbott, once told me, no one's going to know if your bearing clearances are too loose, but everyone's going to know if they're too tight. So make sure that stuff's within range. And there's quite a wide range to deal with, and it comes down to the individual engine builder and maybe his experience about how that is calculated. In Dave's case, he's an old school engine builder. He's ex-pro stock racer. He used to build his own engines and stuff. So we're talking 1,000 horsepower, 400 cube small blocks with carburetors. So no mean feat, and every detail matters in that case. So he's used his experience to sort of clearance everything on the engine, and it's more formulaic than anything. It's just mathematics. So this journal size is this big, and you need this much clearance per journal for a specific application. So we've come up with, I think it's about 2.6 thou on both the mains and the big ends. So it actually took a little bit of fiddling to get those right, especially on the crankshaft. The rods are all brand new and machined correctly, so they were pretty good, and the crank is in good original condition, so we just linished it. But the crankshaft, we had to use a combination of extra clearance bearings and just normal race spec bearings, which already have extra clearance. So Dave's pretty fiddly, so he went through these combinations and messed around and used different, like extra clearance and a normal clearance bearing on the top and bottom, and we got the numbers that he wanted. So there's a lot of pedanticness involved in this if you want to do it properly and be confident that when you fire it up it's not going to fail. So next thing along the line we did was the ring gaps. You'll hear YouTubers love talking about ring gaps, and it's 100% important, and more specifically, it's important when you buy aftermarket pistons because the rings are not gapped. You have to do it. So you can't just grab a ring and stick it in. They are left tight so you can tolerance them for your own purposes. So if you put them in without checking / filing them, you're probably going to wreck the engine pretty quickly. So word of warning, if you get stock rings, like replacement ones, usually they're way too loose because they're doing it for dummies. So there's a big difference there. But check them every time and adjust them where needed. Dave, again, has a specific formula that he went through with the ring gaps based on his experience, and it was quite interesting talking to him about the purpose of them. Obviously, there's expansion. You don't want them butting up because they'll tear the whole thing apart. But also the gaps there to allow gases that build up in between those ring lands to escape, and they need an escape path, and those ring gaps are tailored to allow those gases to escape. So you've got different sizes per ring. So that's all sorted out, and the engine's together now. One interesting thing we did was we had to put the collar on the crankshaft for the oil pump drive. We talked about it earlier about the lack of drive sort of pad on the crankshaft, which damages the oil pump and snaps everything and generally breaks the engine. So we put a Nitto oil pump drive on it, and you've got to basically machine the crank and then press it on, or in our case what we did was more of a, it's probably not more difficult, but you've got to prepare for it a bit more. What we did was we froze the crankshaft in the freezer overnight, and then that shrunk the crankshaft 1/1000th of an inch, which is quite a bit. And the clearance, the interference between the two items is 3/1000ths of an inch. So We got an extra 1,000ths to make it easier for us to get it on there. And then we heated the actual collar so it expanded, and it basically just fell on there and shrunk down real quick. And that's a really old sort of engineering technique that is probably not used as much today as it was in the past. So it was cool fun, interesting to see that crankshaft covered in ice coming out of the freezer overnight. So everything now is ready to go. As far as that bottom end, as it sits, you could put an RB30E single cam cylinder head on it. There's no real difference between the two. So from now on, is the stuff we're doing is very specific to an RB30 DET or RB3025 or 26. So we'll get stuck into those modifications. I haven't actually plugged everything up yet because I wanted to show you how we're going to do it. But now's the time where you don't forget to fit little sleeves and put plugs in, because it's going to bite you on the arse later. Let's get stuck into fitting the head. This is your super important bung. If you don't get this welded up, you've got to bung this off. That's the oil gallery that goes up to the VCT. That does not exist in the RB30 block, so you can't do anything about it. Probably best off getting it welded up if you go to a head shop, but I forgot and I have taps and whatnot, so I'm bunging it. Here's the finished long motor ready to drop in the car. In case you haven't watched lately, this engine is being built for my Z32 300ZX project. So it is ready to go in, and you can probably check out the video about that car up here or something if Woody puts it in. So we've started with an RB30 block, forged pistons, rods, good clearancing, the usual stuff for a performance engine. We've added an RB25 head. This is an early head. It's still got hydraulic lifters. We've complemented that with some Kelford camshafts that are pretty much your street camshafts, so you don't have to modify the cylinder head or change the lifters or anything like that. You just drop them in. It's still got variable cam timing, which is a good thing. It works very well on these, giving you a lot more bottom end torque and bringing those turbos on quicker. We've got an adjustable pulley on the exhaust side that we'll fiddle around with later, maybe on the dyno. In front of the adjustable pulley covered up by it is the Ross Racing trigger kit. So that's the cam, and the crankshaft trigger is a 36-2, and they work together to give you the correct sync for your ECU, in our case a Haltech. Excellent products. We've topped it off with some Ross covers. These are a billet cover that basically replaces the extremely unattractive and very poor breathing factory covers. So we've just whacked on these turbos, which will be on the car eventually, but we've put them on just so we can, so they look good. That's what you do when you finish something.
I thought single turbos were better on RB.
There's extensive video evidence of single turbos being better, but none of them take into account that they just don't look as good as twin turbos. And I'm a child of the 90s JDM Icon vehicle, and all of those ones that were actually cool had a set of twin turbos on them. So that's the way I roll. I love it. These manifolds were made by a mate Brendan from Scope Performance, and they are beautiful. Very happy. When you're putting together an RB3025, there is a lot of little gotchas. It is a sort of a custom project, so to speak. One thing that you will come across if you're not using tubular manifolds, say you were using an original cast manifold, is you do have to machine the top of the block outside of the head gasket area down lower. So above those little Welsh plugs, that has to be clearance about 4 or 5 mil lower than the actual deck height. I didn't need to do that because these manifolds cleared it. And I think most people aren't going to use a factory RB25 manifold, like cast manifold these days, but just keep it in mind. If you get it machined and then have to go back to the machine shop to get that bit taken off, it's going to be pretty annoying. So maybe a check before you do it with your manifold that you've purchased. Another little thing is we got a steel cover here for the timing belt, and it doesn't line up with obviously a completely different cylinder head. You could put the RB25 bottom cover on it, but it still wouldn't cover the entire timing belt section. So what I've done is just add a bit of tin here and there just to fill in the gaps. Having an open timing belt looks cool right up until something falls in there and destroys your engine. So just keep that in mind. You can look as cool as you want, but you don't look cool when you're on the side of the highway with a tiny little pebble stuck in your timing belt and all your valves bent. All of the major parts inside the engine were supplied by Golebys. They got a huge range of performance parts for RBs, JZs, Barras, all the cool stuff except for big blocks. So hit them up if you're looking for something, and you can also hit them up for advice on what are the right parts to buy. They're also having a massive Black Friday sale, so now's the time to get something for cheap. Speaking of cheap, we're also offering a Black Friday 10% discount, and it's not even for Black Friday because we don't even know what Black Friday is. It's just store-wide, so 10% off everything. Hit the merch store.
That's until the end of November too.
Until the end of November.
I think we've still got a couple of random prizes to throw in some boxes too, so
cool.
Maybe some stickers left.
Are we still doing 2 shirts and 1 free?
Don't think we're doing that anymore, no. I'll have to check with the merchandise officer, but I mean, if you want to buy 2 shirts and find out for yourself, maybe hit that link.
Super keen to get this in the car now and continue on with the build. It's been a long time coming, so I reckon this is going to look magic sitting in that engine bay, and we'll add some pipes and stuff. Stay tuned for that, and we'll see you next time.
Didn't even say thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Well, that's the internet theory that R is like whatever the German word for straight is. It starts with an R. Like that's why VR6 is a V. It's a V straight 6.
I thought RB stood for race bread.
R is straight. B is benzene, like petrol. And 30 is.
Isn't it race bread?
No.
Like whole grain?
Rye bread.
White? Italian herbs and cheese. So what's the difference between this engine and one that's out of a petrol or a VL turbo? Or...
This is out of a petrol.
Okay, then. So what's the difference between this and a factory turbo block?
Give me a sec. Nothing now.
What?
I didn't press properly.
Isn't it meant to go after the 8? Eh?
No. It's wherever the guy wanted to put it. For sale, genuine.
You being real?
Yeah, like it doesn't have 6 written on it because it's not a VL engine, it's a petrol engine, so they never did it. It was just stamped in the factory to let them know that this has no compression. That's the only difference between them.
If it goes that way.
Don't crush the party pods, bro. Oh, that's what they're there for.
Yeah. What are they?
Get a coffee mug in there to hold it up. That'll do the trick. There's always that one last lemon squash.
I am taking no responsibility for a grown man taking a beer from a young boy.
A young boy. Hey, I got called old by Gus before.
How old are you?
Hey, because you're old, when you went to schoolies, I was like,
13 years ago.
I was like, dude, that's the first time someone's called me old, thanks.
It won't be the last.
You've had grey hair since you were 18, haven't you?
Come on, bro, I'm not that bad. Don't be a jerk, Max. Max is here experiencing the live Skid Factory experience. This is the
I'm producer.
Patreon supporters top tier, then Max is like way up over here. Max is like up here somewhere. Maybe we could make that a tier. Come see Skid Factory live.
Max tier.
Max tier.
Are you sure you want to offer that?
Well,
Call? I don't know. You probably call. No one really even know what that is, do they? Let's go get another take.
come on, don't take another one. Oh, dude, it's getting worse.
I mean, JZs, everybody loves JZs, but they're not as good as RBs, but, you know, like, whatever, yeah. Everyone's got to have a hobby. That's another outtake for you, bro.
Ahoy crew, just wanted to say a massive thanks to everyone who positively commented on last week's video regarding Alan's news. It is a decision that he has made to better his lifestyle, and it is going to be a massive challenge for myself to take on both roles, but I'm super keen and very excited to keep bringing you epic automotive content every week. This is the end of the video. Click up here to buy some merchandise. There's going to be a QR code there, so if you're watching on your TV, give it a scan, or check out a video right about here where you can watch another video. Thanks for watching. Thanks for all the support. See you in the next chapter. Cheers.